because when I heard what they think, it was very wonderful because they believed in dialogue. What I saw last year, what the world saw when the genocide in Gaza had started 1.5 years ago, that youth in other parts of the world stood up in solidarity. People who did not know the people at the other end of the world were standing up in solidarity, standing up at the horrors of what was taking place. For me, that gave me hope, that humanity has not died down. I still stand up for you because I believe in humanity. That was wonderful to see. And therefore, it gave hope to the idea, oh yes, the necklace of this world is not broken, we can still build a chain. And in that chain is the strength of being one.
Where lust for a whole life and nothing but less makes people jump out of a comfortable pond into an unknown ocean. Welcome to that journey between the East and the West. Who says Rolling Stones don't gather moss? Hello everyone, I am Meenu Gupta, your host for the day, and I'm delighted to have you join me every week as amazing people share their incredible and inspiring life stories of straddling continents. Thank you.
It was close to midnight on 28th February 1986. Olof Palme, the Prime Minister of Sweden at that time, was walking home from a cinema with his wife Lisbeth Palme in a central Stockholm street. Suddenly, he was shot in the back at close range. A second shot grazed Lisbeth's back. Olof Palme was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. Yet, his name lives on. He left a legacy behind, not just for his family or the country, but all over the world. Streets have been named after him, not only in Sweden, but across continents. His ideology lives on through the work of Olof Palme Center in Sweden. Amongst many other stances he took on the international scene, Palme was a widely recognized political figure because of his harsh and emotional criticism of the United States over the Vietnam War, for example, vocal opposition to the crushing of the Prague Spring by the Soviet Union, campaigning against nuclear weapons proliferation, criticism of the Franco regime in Spain, actually he called the regime, in his words, goddamn murderers, opposition to apartheid, and role as a mediator in the Iran-Iraq war. But this is not all. All of this, however, ensured that Palme had many opponents as well as many friends at home and abroad. Today, in the year 2025, many years after Olof Palme was assassinated, we live in a time when democratic values are being tested across the globe, when climate justice and human rights are increasingly interconnected, and when the space for civil society is shrinking in many parts of the world. In these times, the legacy of solidarity, peace, and internationalism is more relevant than ever. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Oscar Emerot, the Secretary General of the Olof Palme International Center, an institution that has been at the forefront of championing democracy, equality, and peace, not just in Sweden, but across continents all over the world. We speak at a time when authoritarianism is resurging, conflicts are multiplying, and our collective future is deeply entwined with how we respond, not just as nations, but as people. Thank you for joining me, Oscar.
Thank you, Meena, and it's an honor to be on your podcast.
Thank you once again. It would be wonderful to get more insights. When we speak today What do you think Palme would say about the state of democracy in 2025?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very relevant question. The other day, when I was invited to give a speech at the manifestation against the war in Ukraine, and a journalist came to me and asked just that same question. And I think you referenced to his speech about the Franco regime, where they call them the goddamn murderers. And I think he would use the same kind of language today when it comes to the different wars we see. And also when it comes to democracy, because he was very clear on that the path to peace and security were going through democracy. And this is the whole fundament where we work from at the Olof Palme International Center. So I think he would be extremely concerned of the development we have seen through the last time.
And how does the Palme Center interpret and carry forward his vision in today's geopolitical context?
To describe that, we need to go a bit back in history. We've been around for 40 years now as the Olof Palme International Center. We were formed from the labor movement in Sweden's International Center together with the peace movement linked to the labor movement in Sweden. And the fundament for the creation of the Palme Center was based on peace and dialogue, which is still our point of entry to everything we do. So that's in our international affairs, it's peace and dialogue, but to that we added democracy, peace and justice, peace and fighting of inequalities, workers' rights, and gender equality. And for the last 10 years, we intensively also work with the climate change and climate justice. So this is like a framework in everything we do. So we are active in about almost 40 countries around the globe right now. And in all activities and programs we do, this is streamlined and in our work, which the basics is always dialogue and peace and democracy.
If we talk about your being there, what was it about the center that spoke to you as a person?
My own history is that when I was a young trade union activist back in the day, in the early 90s, we were organizing public workers in one part of Sweden at the time. But at the parallel with that, the war in Sarajevo were happening, and it was the first war for me being around my 20s that I really saw from firsthand. It was sent on TV, and the people that were suffering in the war were in my age. And the first contact with the Palme Center was that we, during that time, started a project to support public workers in Bosnia at the time. So this was my eye-opener for the Palme Center. And since then, the Palme Center has been a crucial part of my work through the years, even if I've been working with the trade union movement and been there until last September when I took up the role as the Secretary General for the Palme Center. And what I would say right now, our activities is more crucial and important than ever, just as you said in your initial words, especially given when the cuts in foreign aid is happening all over the globe from USAID, but even on the European measure. It's really important that we are fighting back that backlash that is happening right now.
So from what you said, a lot of questions came to my mind. In this time when you said the international aid is being cut off, do you think corporates are jumping in to try and support where the other international aid is falling off?
Not by nature. I think they need to find an added value for the work they do. But I think it's very much up to organizations like myself to encourage corporates to include dialogue to increase their activities in development cooperation. Because if you want to have a sustainable, competitive business model, you need to work with fundamental rights of people, and because that's the only business model that will work for a longer period. But with that said, the development cooperation and the resources we put is also very, very important to contain peace and resilience. Because now we also, to add to that, we see a huge increase in military spending all over the globe. At the same time as we withdraw money from development cooperation, the wise thing to do is that, of course, where we need some military spending, that should be in place. But at the same time, the international development cooperation resources should increase, because that is the best way of building resilience against crisis and wars. And as being in a political organization, I can see that the whole community, both EU, but the global community, is failing this part very much right now. And that is extremely worrying. And to trust or just to trust on private fundings is scary and a bit delicate, because those monies not long term. They are just short term, and given through the history we see, what we did together with others in South Africa, for instance, was that we were there for 20 years with the state money and just the thing that we could be there for so long also changed and made the liberation of South Africa, as an example.
That's very interesting. I found the corporate perspective very interesting, because right now, when we speak of climate change and climate justice, most of the corporates, whether it be medium-sized or large-sized, have a chunk of money aside for putting sustainability on the agenda. Now, the question is always whether it's a cosmetic exercise or it's greenwashing. And however, when we see sustainability, it's very rare that I see towards building peace. In my language, a sustainable world is the end product when you have peace, and peace is possible when there is a sense of belonging, and sense of belonging is possible when there is diversity and inclusion. So the diversity exists the moment we are born on the planet. How we accept the voices and understand and integrate everything into inclusion and go forward to moving to peace, then give a sustainable world, giving a platform to everybody, and then comes together to give a sustainable world. However, that's a model in my head, which I call diversity, inclusion, belonging, peace, and sustainability. What I see in the cosmetic brochures, let me put it diplomatically, for a large number of corporates, is sustainability. There's always a section, be it banks, hotels, corporates, sustainability. We are doing this, this, and this for climate change. But the word, the exact meaning of the word, nobody talks about, because they are linking sustainability to only climate change. What is your take on this?
Yeah, I think you are spot on this. I do recognize that. And for instance, for us that also work with the labor movement and the trade union movement, in today's discussion on sustainability, workers' rights are not at the table at all. And in our conception, it's not possible to have a sustainable business or a sustainable environment for growing businesses if you can't guarantee fundamental workers' rights, for instance. I also think the corporates need to be at the table. I strongly believe in the social dialogue between capital and between states and other stakeholders, but I find it hard to believe that the corporate interest will only be complementary to the grants that is given from international organization and from states. And that is also linked back to the Palme doctrine, is that this is not a way of spending money unwisely. Opposite to that is to spend money on sustainability for states and international actors it's the only way to create sustainable peace. It's an investment, it's not the cost. And of course, in some of our programs, we do work with both, for instance, NGOs, unions, and businesses, where in the local context, to bring one unsustainable business into a sustainable business, which can absolutely have 100% true core values in it, because the end game of that is a much more profitable business. But as I said, I think to count on only private and corporate and philanthropy will not create the fundament of a sustainable, just world that is based on human rights and a human rights approach.
Interesting. Another word that has been on my mind while I've been interacting with very interesting people across the globe, peace builders, climate activists, intercultural experts, is the word community. So I would really be interested in getting your opinion on this word, because there are nuances people have put to it. They are saying that across the globe and across countries, not only in the West, but also in the East and Asia and the global South, earlier in those countries, still some countries, community is still at the heart of everything. And when we say at the heart of everything, that is the goal. And what is going to work for the community, from that, decisions are taken backwards. However, over the years, my understanding, humble understanding, is that industrialization and individualization and the surgence of technology, which is great at one hand, have moved the world away from the concept of community. And when we speak of, I've been talking to many centers and NGOs as well, and when we speak of one world, when we are envisioning one world, how can that happen? I question myself, how can that happen when even local communities in states and countries are not happening? They are falling apart. So there is not a common vision. There is me looking out for me, and you look out for yourself. And I look at my bottom line because I'm here to make money, for example. So how do you see the whole scenario? Now, this is my understanding.
Yeah, it's a very complex discussion, of course, but it's very relevant as well. The whole idea that we organize through is to gain individual freedom and via collective organizing. So we organize locally in political parties, in, where you live, or in women's committee or youth committee. And our strong belief is that only together you can create real change. But I do recognize what you say, and we link it to democracy as well, and that it's much more individual. And if we take more from a Western European perspective, I think most people think that they conduct democracy when they go and vote every fourth year or every third year. Maybe they buy fair trade coffee, which is good, and they make calculated, sustainable choices in their private life. That's good, absolutely do that, but that is not how you create strong communities that drive the community to inclusion and to a democratic space. That must be done together by collective organizing. And in the programs we do around the globe, we are focusing on that, because if the less resources you have, the more vulnerable and precarious position you have in this chain of change. And therefore, it's very important to use the collective mechanism to make that as a driver. But I think you identify this challenge very much. And if it's more like that now, because of or via the industrialization or whatever that is. I don't know if it's the digital world, we will see that even more. I think we need to think of how to organize in an AI digital world when it comes to this.
Thank you for sharing that. How do you think youth are part of this exercise? I've been talking to some youth activists and peace builders as well, and I have been very pleasantly surprised, and I'm so happy to see. And then I think, okay, the future of the world is not as bad as I would have thought some years back, because when I heard what they think, it was very wonderful, because they believed in dialogue. What I saw last year, what the world saw when the genocide in Gaza had started 1.5 years ago, that youth in other parts of the world stood up in solidarity. People who did not know the people at the other end of the world were standing up in solidarity, standing up at the horrors of what was taking place. For me, that gave me hope, that humanity has not died down. I still stand up for you because I believe in humanity. That was wonderful to see. And therefore, it gave hope to the idea, oh yes, the necklace of this world is not broken, we can still build a chain. And in that chain is the strength of being one. So where do you see in your work, because particularly, now let me try to frame the question a bit better. In the work that you've been doing and the experiences you've had across countries, particularly with trade union, how do you see trade and youth and community, these three things linking up?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's first of all, I think you're right. And we have other examples right now, like it's young people in Belgrade taking the streets. It's young people in Tbilisi, in Georgia. It's young people in Thailand that forms a new progressive party. And it's easily to think that the young people are not engaged, but they are. They really are. And we see a lot of examples of that. On your question, I think what an organization like the Palme Center can do is that we support the grassroots movement to take the next step to organize. We don't do it, we facilitate, we support it. We work in many contexts with both the more formal institutions, like older trade unions with the older political parties. But sometimes the gap between this institution and the grassroots movement is quite wide, and they don't really necessarily discuss with each other. They don't nearly necessarily understand their common language. So we facilitate the room or around the table they can sit and discuss this. And the end game for us is that the grassroots movement might become so mature so they can discuss with and influence the political structure of that organization. And we have many examples of that, where we are conducting skills training for young politicians. And today we can see that they are the leaders of the party or leaders of that political movement. So the change is within themselves, but we have had the possibility to support that change. And therefore the youth is very, very important. And we do that a lot in our programs. We focus on youth and young women and women as the change agents in the environment they are in and acting in.
Thank you. Question then comes while you were speaking, then the idea came up, or the thought, because you mentioned about the work that is going on. If you can share a couple of instances where the work was done, policies happened, or some large institutional change happened to move a block, and you went home happy and had your glass of whiskey or had a cup of coffee and said, that worked.
Yeah, I think, of course, and everyone understands this takes time. It's not black and white. It's not like now we started and now it's finished. When is it ever finished? I don't know really. But we have a lot of different examples. If we take southern part of Africa, we work with a lot of different countries there, and we do skills training together with the branches for the political parties and the unions there. And there we can see clear development. And it's also local. They're taking over their communities, discussing in the communities. And one extra interesting thing with what the work we do as a Palme Center, because we are strong believers in dialogue, we seldom go for the boycott of things. We try to find a way to facilitate the discussion instead. Is that in quite many countries we do work together with liberal forces, not only progressive or social democratic forces, but also liberals and center forces to combine and create a space where it's okay to think different, but the overall main cause is to find a political atmosphere that gives space for discussion and development. And that can be seen quite surprisingly in many contexts where the political opponent is your enemy by heart. And this is a model that Olof Palme himself argued for strongly. You can disagree on most things, but you can agree on the rules of it.
No, I agree. If I were at a table with a few people, I would agree to disagree. However, look for a common solution, keeping in mind the fundamental goal of what we are trying to achieve. So if we disagree on some points, I will try and find commonality in other points and probably look at multiple perspectives to find a common road somewhere.
Exactly. And here, I think the experience gives us that young people, they are more dynamic in this because they have not invested so much in different hierarchies or power positions, or they're in it because they want the political change.
Well, that's interesting. So essentially you are saying they are more open to looking at multiple perspectives because they are focused on the final result, which is change.
Exactly. Especially if they live in a precarious environment where they cannot provide for themselves or their families and so on. They need a political solution more than a political power game.
You know, when we use the word dialogue, I'll put this question to you because people put this question to me several times. So I'm going to scratch your brain because my brain has been scratched multiple times because I stand at my stance and I stick to it because I believe in dialogue as well. So the question that has come to me is, listen, in this precarious situation where we find ourselves in multiple crises, where you have leaders like Trump and Putin, this is just to give an example, where is dialogue? So where is the sword against the word? So how is that supposed to work? Having said that, that is the mentality or one part of it which is leading other nations to have trigger reactions and building up on military expenditure, because I believe in the last 3 years it has gone up by almost 20% globally. So I have this question come to me many times.
Yeah, to me too. It's of course it's a core question, and I think the activities we do is very locally based, and there we work with dialogue and try to form, as I said, facilitate the conversation, facilitate the negotiations, and also support political programs. In a case with where a political leader is violating all international laws that we agreed upon, that is not respecting the institution of accountability and so forth, dialogue is, of course, always needed, but it's also important to use the forces we need to defend the right of a territory and so. But it cannot be that dialogue is not present. But as we see in Ukraine, for instance, it's such a violation on every international law that we have agreed upon. So that must be shown. And I think, but in the end, we need dialogue. And when it comes to the president on the other side of Atlantic, if you are in Europe, dialogue seems very difficult at this time. But what I think is important, and also when it comes, for instance, the atrocities in Gaza, it is important that we that work with human rights are very precise and instrumental when it comes to not adding people from Israel or from Russia or from something else, that they are still individuals with their own thoughts. So we need to discuss with organizations in these countries, with the democracy activists. We need to put effort in the good forces in the countries that are living through with governments that are violating our international law. And that is what we do. So sometimes we get questioned, why do you work with the still organization in that and its country? Because we still believe that the good forces must be supported now more than ever. When the Swedish government said we will stop development cooperation money go to Russia, we said, no, that is wrong. The democratic voices in Russia needs it more than ever right now. We never paid any money to Russia, but we paid money to resources to the democratic voices in Russia. And that is the same for the support of trade union activists in the US or whatever right now, that we need to support them. So the dialogue on that sense, but what we discuss is the common security and the peace, and that is built on diversity, and that we believe different things, but we believe in a set of rules. And if these rules are set aside, we need to mark that we are many countries that do support them and respect them. But with this said, it's very difficult to have a dialogue with someone who is not willing to discuss.
True. Somebody who's not willing to come to the table on the same plank. You used the term common security. How would you define that for the understanding of people who've not heard the term?
Yeah, and this is, I think also sometimes it's difficult to understand what it is, but this is of course a legacy for us because Olof Palme together with others formed the concept, and the basics was to, as I just said, to form some rules that everyone could agree upon to create peace, even if these countries are on extremely different politically points. And this was created during the 80s when we had at the time, the superpowers. I think the concept is extremely valid today as well, maybe more than ever, because now the international community is even more scattered and more spread. So today we need those set of rules that everyone respects, and I think it's time to reactivate them. But you can just say it's like a family. We have certain rules in a family, and then we apply to them, and we don't necessarily always like them, but we do respect them because it's better to arm for peace than arm for war, and because otherwise we don't have anything. So it's for the global family, a set of rules to keep a lasting peace.
I'm glad you mentioned that equation, because I often, when I talk of diversity, I often use the term family. That when we are born in a certain family, they are children, they are parents, and they're all different. It's diversity already at the dining table. So where you have to give breath to the voices for them to feel some common rules, etc., common values to adhere to. And if we can do that as a family, then we can do it also as a community and country and all over the world. So I'm glad you drew the parallel, because for me, it's seems easy, but I realize a lot of people do not think like me. That's diversity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But you mentioned, and this is something very interesting for people who might be listening, for the lay people as well as for the experts who are there in the field. Both for climate justice, sustainability, and peace, when nations cross boundaries, leaders cross boundaries, even though there are certain regulations in place and laws in place. Now, the common context, the question that people carry in their minds across continents is, who holds them back? Who can hold them back? If there are international regulations, how are they binding? What happens? For example, even a lot of people are questioning the relevance of COP as it exists. They are calling in, as one person, one of my guests termed COP as a jamboree. So, having said that, that is COP, A. B, the relevance of the regulations which collectively world leaders apparently put together. They sit behind very expensive doors, make very expensive visits, come together in a very expensive place and make these regulations. How are they binding? And they go back to their worlds.
Yeah, it's of course we could talk about universal legislation and universal rule of law, and I think when it comes to, for instance, labor rights and so, we do have a system within the UN system and ILO, and so we have the Court of International Justice that it's not perfect, but it's still a place to hold people accountable. When it comes to climate, we as the Palme Center, we argue for this, what is called the ecocide legislation that should be added to the Rome Statute, which was also the meaning and was also something Olof Palme launched already in the 70s. That is, like very simply put, it's a parallel to the International Court of Justice, that they also can put states accountable for grave and huge violation against the climate. Because in the best of world, trust between states would be enough, and that for a COP meeting, that the trust that you deliver on that would be enough. But we see obviously this is not enough, because we are going in the wrong direction, and the climate changes are increasingly. And as we started to discuss peace, I think the climate injustice and the effects of the climate change will increase in the end, wars and social unrest, social instability. It will create massive movement of people from areas where you can't live to other areas and so forth. So it's high time to have something in place that hold countries accountable for the neglect of the agreement when it comes to COP, for instance. So we need to have a universal legal binding system that is also respected.
So you are saying, in effect, two things in the present times, which I totally agree. Trust, which ideally should be the binding word when regulations are put in place, and in these conferences, that aspect is not being looked at. It has become more of a cosmetic exercise. So in order to address that, we need to have binding regulations.
Yes, absolutely, because no, the trust isn't there. And of course, in an idealistic world, an ideal world, because the climate threat is, no one is escaping that. So trust should be enough. But this is, of course, not. And it's much more complicated than put here. But at the end of the day, to have that change, we need to be able to hold those that is not following the agreement accountable for that.
Perfect. This is actually, you've literally spoken the reflections of my mind.
Yeah, okay, good. We agree.
We are on the same platform. Now, if you could send one message to the people, the audience listening to this podcast from anywhere in the world, what would that be?
It's the same message that where I say when I'm out speaking with local unions, political activists, and people that are frustrated. I meet a lot of people these days that say, I want to act, I want to be activated. I'm bored of sitting in front of a computer pushing thumbs up for great things. I want to be active. And what I say is get active in your local community, in your local organization. Start where you can to be active. Of course, you should also be active in the international sphere, but I think local activism is the foundation to create change for real. And if there is no organization, maybe you should be the one that create that organization so others can join.
Perfect. Thank you. I totally agree there again.
Thank you. Yes. Easily said. Maybe.
Easily said, but it's the intention which takes you to the next step.
Absolutely.
So A, a situation, and B, finding that these are the 2 or 3 options one can do. This is my intention. And then leap and collect. And yes, it helps when there are other organizations who can help with that hand-holding. So I guess that is where Olof Palme Center's major contribution would come, that at the time when that thought comes, that intention comes, A, to put it there, and when that comes to handhold.
Yeah. No, definitely. And to make some commercial, please look at our web page and see where we are active. And if you have the possibility, contact our regional offices. And we are always open for new cooperations.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining me today. And I wish you all the best in building the community chain.
Thank you, Minu. It was a pleasure to be on this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the series Between the East and the West. Do subscribe to the channels mentioned on the site in case, of course, you liked what you heard. I am Minu Gupta, the host of the series, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. We love feedback. Thank you once again. Namaste and bye-bye.